This is going to be from The Inquisitor's Tale by Adam Gidwitz. And Chapter 1. The Brewster's Tale. Jean's story starts when she was a baby. Her mother and father were regular peasants, spent all day in the fields, just like most of the folks in our town. But there was one thing that made them special. They had this dog, a beautiful dog, a white greyhound with a copper blaze down its nose. They called her Gwenfort, which is a ridiculous name for a dog if you ask me, but they never did ask me, so that's what they called her. They loved Gwenfort, and they trusted her. And so one day, they went off to the fields to work, and they left baby Jean with Gwenfort. "What?" I interrupted. "They used a dog as a babysitter." "Well, yes, I suppose they did." "Is that normal? For peasants to use dogs as babysitters?" "No, I suppose it ain't, but she was a real good dog." "Oh, that explains it." You gotta understand, Gwenfort loved that little girl so much and was so protective of her that nobody worried about it. But maybe we should have. For as Jean's folks were out in the fields, working in the hot sun, a snake slithered into their house. It was an adder with beady eyes and black triangles down its back. The day was hot, as I said, but the house was cool and dark because the walls in our houses are thick, made of mud and straw, and the only window is the round hole in the roof where the smoke from the cooking fire escapes. The adder, poisonous and silent as the devil himself, slithered in through the space between the thin wooden door and the mud floor. The baby girl lay asleep in her bed of straw. Gwenfort, the greyhound, was curled up around her. But when the snake came in, Gwenfort sat up. She growled. She leapt onto the mud floor, right in front of the snake. The adder stopped. Its forked tongue tested the air. Gwenfort's fur stood up on her back. She growled, low and deep in her throat. The adder recoiled. He became a zigzag on the floor. Gwenfort growled again. The adder struck. Adders, as you know, are very fast. But so are greyhounds. Gwenfort shimmied out of the way just in time and snapped her jaws shut on the back of the adder's neck. Then she began to shake the snake. She danced around the one-room house, shaking and shaking that snake until the hay of the beds was scattered and the stone circle of the fire was ruined and the adder's back was broken. Finally, she tossed its carcass into a corner. Jean's parents were coming home from the fields just then. They were sweaty and tired. They'd been up since long before sunrise. Their eyelids were heavy, and their arms and backs ached. They pushed open the door of their little house. As the yellow light of summer streamed into the darkness, they saw the straw of the beds scattered all over the floor. They saw the fire circle ruined. They saw Gwenfort standing in the center of the dark room, panting, her tail wagging, her head high with pride, completely covered in blood. What they did not see was their baby girl. Well, they got panicked. They figured the worst. So they took that dog outside, and they killed her. "Wait," I cry, "but the dog isn't dead. It's alive." "It was dead," said Marie. "Now it's alive." I open my mouth, and no sound comes out. They come back into that house and try to put their lives back together. They were crying, of course, because they loved that dog, and they loved their little girl even more. But we peasants know that life ain't going to stop for our tears. So they clean up. They put the embers back in the fire pit. They pick up the straw from the beds. And that's when they see her. Baby Jean, lying asleep in the hay, and in a corner, the dead snake. Well, they picked up their daughter and held her tight and cried for joy. And after a little bit of that, they looked at each other, mother and father, and realized the horrible mistake they had made. So they took the body of Gwenfort, and they buried her out in a beautiful grove in the forest, a short walk from the village. They dug up purple crocuses and planted them all around her grave. As the years went by, we started to venerate that dog proper, like the saint she is. Every time a new baby was born, they'd always go out to the holy grove and pray to Saint Gwenfort, the holy greyhound, to keep that baby safe. Well, years passed, and baby Jean grew and grew. She was a happy little thing. She liked to run down the long dirt road of the village, stopping into the dark doorways, waving to the people who lived inside each house. She came and saw me, and helped me stir the hops in my old oak barrel. She visited Peter, the priest, who lived with his wife, Igraine, even though he's not supposed to have a wife on account of him being a priest. She would stop by and see Mark, son of Mark, who had a little boy named Mark, too. She didn't visit with Charles the bailiff, though, who was my brother-in-law, because in addition to being our officer of the peace, he's also about as kind as an old stick. But of all the peasants in our town, and there were more than that, but I don't want to bore you with the long lists of people who don't come into the story, Jean's favorite was old Teresa. Old Teresa was a strange one. She collected frogs from the streams in the forest and put their blood in jars to give to people when they were sick. She stared at the stars at night and told us our futures by how they moved. She was, I think it's fair to say, a witch. But she was a nice old witch, and she was always very kind to little Jean. And then one day it turned out little Jean was just as strange as Teresa. I was there the first time it happened. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She was chasing Mark, son of Mark, around my yard, when she stopped cold. She pulled up straight, like a stack of stones, and her eyes rolled back in her head. Then she went toppling to the ground like somebody tipped that stack of stones over. She lay on the ground, and I saw her pudgy little arms and legs shaking and her teeth grinding in her head. Scared the life out of me, it did. I ran screaming to old Teresa, 'cause she's the only one not out in the fields. So we huddled over little Jean. And then the fit stopped. Jean's breathing was ragged, but she weren't shaking no more. Teresa bent over and roused the little girl, cupped her wrinkled hand behind Jean's head. Jean opened her eyes. Old Teresa asked her what happened, how she was feeling, that sort of thing. I'm leaning over them, wondering if Jean's going to be all right. And then Teresa asks, "Did you see something, little one?" I don't know what she meant. But finally Jean's face clears up and she answers, "I saw the rain." And then, at that very moment, there's a clap of thunder overhead and the sky opens up and the rain starts to fall. I swear it on my very life. I crossed myself about 100 times and was about to go tell the world the miracle I just witnessed when Teresa grabbed my wrist. She had milky blue eyes, Teresa did. She held my wrist tight and she said, "Don't you tell no one about what just happened." The rain was running down the wrinkles in her face like they was stream beds. "Don't you tell a soul, not even her parents. Let me deal with it. Swear to me." Well, that's a hard thing to ask. See a little girl perform a miracle and not tell her parents or no one about it? But when old Teresa grabs your wrist and stares at you with those pale blue eyes, well, I swore. After that, Jean spent a lot of time with Teresa. She had more fits, but she never did see the future again. Or if she did, she didn't tell no one what she saw. Until one day, a few years later, I was with her and Teresa when Jean had another one of her fits, falling down, shaking, eyes rolling back in her head, and when she woke up, she said there was a giant coming. Teresa said that was nonsense and to hush. There were no giants in this part of France, but she said it again and again. I couldn't figure out why she was saying all this in front of me, Hadn't Teresa told her to keep her mouth shut? But then Jean said that the giant was coming to take away old Teresa. This is from The Inquisitor's Tale by Adam Gidwitz. And if you want to hear what happens next, you're going to have to read the book yourself.